if you are not prepared to come to that table and to represent that voice, don't come. Because we don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't need Muslims that don't want to be a Muslim voice. We don't need queers that don't want to be a queer voice. Come on, speak it.
Under U.S. law, we admit a certain number of refugees from all around the world based on some fairly narrow criteria.
I want you to know that you belong, that this is our country, and no amount of hate-filled bullying from the White House is going to change that.
Typically, refugee status is not granted just based on economic need.
It's unfortunate that he feels the way he feels about people of color in this country. It's unfortunate the way he feels about immigrants, naturalized citizens or not, in this country. But I think what I would tell him is that it's time to move on from him, and it's time to move on from his conception of an America that we have tried to move past for a long time.
Or because a family lives in a bad neighborhood or poverty.
We're going to fight back together, and we're going to become stronger for it. Please know that I'll never back down. No bully, no kind of attack to silence me is going to work. It's actually going to make me work harder for you. So fight back with me. Walk down all the streets of the 13th Congressional District proudly that you have a Congresswoman that is not going to sell us out, that is not going to be quiet while there's a continued assault on our working families.
It's typically defined fairly narrowly. You have a state, for example, that was targeting a political activist, and they need to get out of the country for fear of prosecution or even death.
First, no one is illegal. That term is derogatory now because it dehumanizes people. You can say any other forms of maybe coming in without regulations or so forth, but the use of illegal is disrespectful, and I ask my colleagues to try in so many ways to not dehumanize our immigrant neighbors that are trying to come in for a safe haven.
Even as we are a nation of immigrants, we're also a nation of laws. Undocumented workers broke our immigration laws, and I believe that they must be held accountable, especially those who may be dangerous. That's why over the past 6 years, deportations of criminals are up 80%. And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security. Felons, not families. Criminals, not children. Gang members, not a mom who's working hard to provide for her kids. We'll prioritize, just like law enforcement does every day.
I felt like some of the stories were a little overprint. And as I explained to my fellow presidents, under U.S. law, we admit a certain number of refugees from all around the world based on some fairly narrow criteria. And typically, refugee status is not granted just based on economic need or because a family lives in a bad neighborhood or poverty. It's typically defined fairly narrowly. You have a state, for example, that was targeting a political activist, and they need to get out of the country for fear of prosecution or even death. There may be some narrow circumstances in which there is a humanitarian or refugee status that a family might